Churchill was ride a tundra buggy, right? Which is a
That's right.
huge
Yeah.
vehicle with huge tires that can go out on the tundra, but you're on that vehicle, you never get off, right? Whereas what you're doing is a little bit different. Kind of explain what that is, just to bring people into the whole scene as to what's going on.
Yeah, so we explore a network of trails that kind of extend from town into the wildlife management area. We go out in 4x4 vehicles. We find the bears, and then we actually have the flexibility of getting out of the vehicle and on the ground to photograph bears at eye level. And it's not just bears. There's foxes, there's Arctic hares, there's all kinds of birds up here too. But just being able to get that nice low angle makes the wildlife more impressive.
It's also smaller groups and things like that that really it's kind of the opposite of what you're dealing with when you're out on the big tundra vehicles, which are great and they've got their niche, but it's just something. It's seeing things from a different angle.
I think what you said, Alex, is the perfect thing. It's an independent traveler that is really into photography. Back in the day when everybody used to ride tundra buggies, they were a lot different than they are now, right? They were a lot lower to the ground. They were still fairly high, but they provided a level of safety. And then they would allow you to get out further onto the, what would you guys call it? It's not necessarily ice, because the ice isn't necessarily formed at that time, but out onto the tundra, right?
So the buggies operate on a network of trails that were put in place by the military when they were here. So they don't really go off the trail there. But yeah, they go out on the tundra, and I think the original tundra buggies were also a little bit smaller
and easier to shoot from. Whereas what you guys provide is, now you say you can get out of the vehicle. You can, but you're still very safe. And ultimately the bear safety is number one, right? So if there's a bear within 5 feet, you're not getting out of the vehicle. If there's a bear within 50 feet, you're not getting out of the vehicle. It's really in a safe situation with big lenses. It kind of explain that so that people understand that there is no way, shape, or form that the bears are always first, and then photography is second. But you can get some really good photography with the way you guys are doing it, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, we're actually not able to approach a bear within 100 meters. But if the bear approaches us, that's okay. So what we're constantly trying to do is anticipate bear behavior, try to predict which way it's moving, and then try to get ahead of it and set up our photographers in a place where you can get that nice natural head-on shot. And then we let the bears come to us, and the bear will kind of determine how comfortable it is with us.
Is there readily identifiable bears that show up year after year after year where you guys can learn behavior and learn habits and have that predictability pay off because you know what's going on? Is that the situation? I've only been there once, so I don't know enough about kind of what's going on and how it all works.
Yeah, there's definitely bears that have their characteristics. You can generally tell them apart by some of the scarring on their faces. But yeah, I mean, even throughout a season, we'll often see the same bears, day after day, and some of them are a little bit more curious than others. Some of them are a little bit more cautious, and you kind of get to learn and read that behavior, and that kind of determines, how comfortable you are with your guests out of the vehicle.
It's really quite fascinating from a bear behavior standpoint too. Yeah, they are harder to tell apart than brown bears or grizzly bears because on some level they're all white and fuzzy. But even identifying through time using behavioral cues. So we've got a couple of bears that we've been seeing the last few years that spar, like they're buddies. And so we know if we can track those bears down, they're usually going to be putting on a good show for us. And so being able to identify those bears through time and know what to expect and where they might be turning up, what are the neighborhoods they like and things like that. It's really quite rewarding when we can craft an experience that gets that highlights some of those unique behaviors that you see here in Churchill.
Alex, you said you started the company in 2016, but how long have you been up there guiding for these bears?
Well, I started, I first traveled up to Churchill 13 years ago. It was at the end of summer, and I had always wanted to visit Churchill. I'd been really high up on my list, and I just happened to see an ad in the paper that said 60% off to anywhere in Canada. It was by Via Rail, which is the train that services Churchill. And so I booked a ticket on a Tuesday. I left 2 days later on Thursday, and it takes 48 hours to get here by train. So I arrived on a Saturday, and within 48 hours, I got to see bears, belugas, and northern lights, and I was instantly hooked. I fell in love with this place. And when I left, I knew that I wanted to come back the following year and work. So I started asking around and started applying for jobs, and I actually got offered a job to manage the Seaport Hotel and Restaurant, which is the only hotel and restaurant that's open in Churchill year round. And I feel like anyone that lives in Churchill has at some point or another worked there. But that kind of opened the door for me, and I worked from September until January. So I've worked bear season and then stayed on a little bit later. And then in that time, I had saved up enough money to start traveling, and I ended up traveling Asia for 9 months, and then I ran out of money and came back to Churchill and did it all over again. And then I went to, I think the next trip was actually South America and Antarctica, and then the next year I did Africa, and I kept working seasonally and traveling in the off season. And then it got to the point where, I felt like I needed to establish some roots in town. The guiding didn't really start until, I guess 8 years ago. I started working for Great White Bear as a bus driver. And then I also worked in the summertime for Sea North Tours as a beluga whale guide, actually doing snorkeling tours with beluga whales at the time, which unfortunately is no longer allowed. But I still do some guiding for Sea North Tours as well. Churchill is, probably known for its polar bears more than anything, and then the Northern Lights, but it's also the beluga whale capital. There's 3,500 to 4,000 whales that migrate back to the Churchill River every summer, which is just mind-blowing.
Now, the Churchill River is where they go to kind of shed they gather, I believe.
Yes, they migrate back to the Churchill River every year because early in the summertime, the capeling, which is this tiny fish that they feed on, they spawn there. So they go there for feeding, but the Churchill River estuary also protects them from their main predator, which is the orca. So the Hudson Bay does actually have orcas. And because they're protected in the river, that's where they go to mate, and that's where they go to give birth to their calves.
I had a question from earlier. How big is Churchill? Because you were saying just about everybody's worked at the hotel there. How big is the town itself?
You can walk from one end of town to the other in probably about 10 minutes. I think at the moment the population hovers around 850. It's a very seasonal town. I mean, Michael, you've been to Churchill. You know that one of the most recognizable landmarks is the granary. That's the town's primary employer, which actually hasn't been operational for a while. So our population has declined a little bit in the last few years and has relied on tourism more than anything, really.
It's interesting. Churchill, though it only has 800 people-ish, it definitely feels like they're right around 800 people. It's kind of got a bit of an overbuilt feel that, because it was a military town during the Cold War for so long, that provided some perks of infrastructure. Like we've got an airport that can accommodate bigger jets than any town of 800 people I've ever been in. Actually, it was so long that for a long time it was on the list of places you could emergency land the space shuttle if we were still in the space shuttle business. And so you land at one end and then you got a taxi all the way up to the terminal, and it can take quite a while. But also, the military infrastructure that gives us the trails that we can drive around on and look for polar bears. And so though it's a town of 800, it kind of has a feel like it's a little bit larger than that, or a little bit overbuilt.
So you guys have tons of different tours, and we're going to get into all of them, but can you just highlight a polar bear day? If you're out with a bunch of clients from whatever time you get up to whatever time you go back to the hotel or whatever the accommodations are, just give us a snapshot into what actually goes on and how you guys operate those tours.
We basically pick our guests up right at 8 o'clock. We try to get out ahead of everyone else, try to get that nice morning light. We have 4 vehicles that go out every day, and we're in constant communication with each other. So we'll kind of split up and scout different areas. And then once we find something, we're able to let each other know, and then basically hang out and take pictures of whatever we've found. We'll have lunch out on the tundra. We're usually not too far away from either the research center or town where we can, stop and top up on tea or coffee if we have to, or use the bathrooms. But for the most part, we pretty much stay out in the field. And again, because we primarily cater to photographers, often that means just waiting out a bear for, if we have this shot in mind, it means waiting out the bear for it to finally, get up and start walking around. So I feel like that's also kind of what sets us apart from some of the other tours, where if you're paired up with, regular travelers, they might lose interest in a bear that's been sleeping for a while, not knowing that, it takes patience to kind of have the shot that you have in mind work out for you. And then, we pretty much stay out as late as we can, pretty much until the light runs out. We've actually joked around that we might have to start charging a Sony price, because we've noticed that people with Sonys want to stay out a lot longer than some of the other photographers. But we kind of chase that light, and then we'll head back to town. And then during bear season, it's not the optimal time to view the northern lights, but we're kind of always watching the skies. And if the aurora is visible before midnight, we'll pick guests back up and head out and photograph the northern lights.
What I really love about leading tours like this, because we do specialize in photographers, and we've got these small vehicles that we're cruising around in, it almost feels like some of those weeks during polar bear season feel like photography camp. Because you've got all these photographers rolling around. So there's a lot of camera nerdery that goes along with it. There's a lot of bear behavior talk, and we get really good crews. And I was just thinking of a situation, kind of put real world application on what we were just talking about. I was out earlier. So it must have been October, because Jenny was here, Darcy Kahn and Max Block we were all in a vehicle together, and we had this male bear that was sleeping on the rocks, which for most folks is, you snap a photo and then you keep rolling. But we just noticed that the way the sun was going to be oriented to this bear in about an hour, if things came together, that bear was going to have perfect rim light on it. So a polar bear standing on top of the rocks with the sun behind it, just having that golden or silver, they're polar bears, the silver shimmer. And so we sat there for a couple hours waiting for this bear to stand up, and I'll be damned if it didn't stand up right in front of the sun. And we all got this fantastic, like it was the shot of that week anyway. But it took commitment. Like we had to put in our time, we had to wait for it, and everybody was rewarded. It was really some great shots that came out of that encounter.
Well, I think the cool thing for you guys is you're both photographers, right? So you having the knowledge of the location and then having the photographic knowledge, that just puts the participants so far ahead for every tour that you do, right?
Well, and the fact that we live here, like you know where they're going to go, and all the angles and things like that. So being able to say, oh, well, if that bear continues on that route, we could pick it up down that way, and the sun's doing this. If we wanted backlight, if we wanted front light, we can really craft some excellent scenarios with this local knowledge.
You guys have referenced polar bear season a couple of times. Explain to us what polar bear season is. Is that like is it October 24th through November 3rd and you're done, or what is it?
Well, you know what? I think instead of calling it polar bear season, maybe we should call it tourist season, because that's when the tourists head up there, because they think it's the best time to view wildlife. And it's different every year, right? You can have good weeks, you can have bad weeks. I think a lot of people don't realize that you can actually see bears in Churchill in the summertime. But in theory, in October, well, not in theory, in October, November, polar bears start becoming more active in anticipation of that ice forming. So polar bears don't hibernate, but they do go into a bit of a walking hibernation, which means during the summer months, they're conserving their energy and they're kind of lethargic. And you can often see them sleeping on the rocks or or cooling off in the water on some of the warmer days. But as temperatures drop in Churchill and ice begins to form, they start kind of pacing up and down that shoreline, waiting for that first ice to form so that they can head back out and start hunting seals. That's what they're waiting for.
With the ability to cater to photographers and kind of photographers' needs, you guys talked about the military trail system. Is that what you're limited to traveling as well, or do you have a road system that you can travel in addition to where the tundra buggies can go?
Both. There's a series of smaller trails outside of the actual wildlife management area that we have access to, and those were also put in place by the military. And then there's an area a little bit farther east where the buggies go, and then there's Bird Cove, which is part of the wildlife management area that we operate in as well. And those are, again, some of the larger trails that were put in place when the military was here. So we never go off the trail, ripping up the tundra. No one wants to photograph bears with walking on tire tracks, right? So we try to protect and preserve the tundra as much as possible.
Now, when you do your beluga trips, is that all in raft, or do you have the ability to fly and get the overhead pictures?
The beluga tours are primarily done from a Zodiac. And so one of the things that we're working on right now is putting together a summer package where we can actually charter a Zodiac and then explore up the coast. And as I mentioned, in the summer months, often you see bears kind of hanging out close to the shoreline, and sometimes you even see them in the water cooling off. And so by chartering a Zodiac to yourself, you kind of have a little bit more of that flexibility to kind of leave the Churchill River and explore the Hudson Bay coastline. And then, in terms of aerial shots, there's really very few areas within Churchill on land where you're able to operate a drone. But if you actually go up the shoreline, there's no limitations there, and you can get some really amazing aerial shots of pods of beluga whales with a drone.
That would be my goal.
Right. Just before I forget, I wanted to touch base on something that Drew mentioned, which is, I think, really important to talk about. Is our trips really do have that photography camp feel, and I think for me, having lived in Churchill for 13 years now, sometimes you kind of become a little bit jaded. I mean, I still appreciate the wildlife and the nature here, but sometimes all it takes is being with someone else that just views things slightly differently to kind of get those creative juices going again. And I often find that in our tiny groups, we can be photographing the same thing, but looking at it slightly differently, and then comparing images and being like, oh wow, I love what you did here. So I feel that our guests really feed off of each other, and I know I definitely, as a guide, feed off of their creativity as well.
I always look forward to when Dave Sanford shows up. You've been working so hard to get polar bear season up and running or whatever, and then all of a sudden Dave shows up and it feels like this is how it's supposed to be.
Yeah, Dave's definitely got an eye for the light and those unique opportunities. So
not only that, I think what sets Dave apart is that he truly appreciates every moment that he's out there, and he reminds you of that too.
There are opportunities to shoot video as well, right? It's not all just photography, but it's harder because you do have to most of the time get out of the car and you have to set up a tripod and all that jazz. So you don't get as many opportunities depending on the situations with the bears, but there are opportunities for that, right?
Yeah, definitely.
We do work with, so a lot of times if we have film crews, we'll take them out exclusively. So for folks that are looking for video, we do have an option where you can get a vehicle all to yourself. And that's really what usually folks in that situation, Michael, and Ron now too, that's really what you guys are looking for. So you can contact us about video specific stuff, and we can definitely craft a situation that's going to be perfect for you.
Cool. I just wanted to make sure that people knew that that was an opportunity. I mean, obviously you're going to get a lot more stuff with stills because a lot of times you can shoot from the car, and you can still do that with video. You're just not going to get that super solid, really nice, tight footage, but it could work. And especially with phone or social media stuff. I mean, I'm sure you can get that all day long.
I don't know. I got a Ford truck. It's super stable. It's like a rock.
That's not the only polar bear opportunity that you guys offer, right? There are some other opportunities. What is that?
So it goes back to what Alex was talking about and what made him fall in love with Churchill that first time. Like what we've been talking about so far is what people expect. That's what people are looking for when they think Churchill. Like we say, everybody's probably conjuring it, snow and polar bears and things like that. But, Alex fell in love with Churchill in the fall. Like there's this very diverse time in Churchill, which has so much opportunity. So what, Alex, what all was it about the fall excursions that drew you in?
I think that first time that I visited Churchill, I was just blown away and overwhelmed at everything that there was here. Being able to see bears, belugas, and northern lights in 48 hours was just kind of a dream trip for me. I think for me, having lived in Winnipeg and always wanted to visit Churchill, it instilled a huge sense of pride in being Manitoban. I think stepping off the train and smelling that sea breeze and just remembering that the Hudson Bay is technically part of the Arctic Ocean, and being able to dip your toes in the Arctic Ocean was pretty amazing for me. But it was just that greater awareness to your surroundings, whether it was constantly looking over your shoulder to see if there was bears, or getting into the habit of looking up at the night sky if you could see the northern lights, or even just jumping in a kayak and being surrounded by hundreds of whales. It was that connection with nature that really made me fall in love with this place.
So I should point out too that Alex has a photo gallery here in town, the only photo gallery that Churchill has to offer, and it's full of all these shots. And I've been working with Alex long enough that I feel like the gallery should be called like something like amazing shots that Alex has taken while Drew was standing right next to him, struggling to get anything at all. And I flipped through his calendar and I'm like, oh yeah, I remember that. I was standing next to him. And so really the reason I wanted to come to Churchill and was to learn Alex's secrets. So maybe if we just, particularly on Aurora, like if we could just take a second and ask Alex, so what are your secrets and why haven't you shared them with me yet?
Honestly, my biggest secret is, it's really not a secret. I think photography 101 is just putting yourself in the right place at the right time. And for me, that right place is Churchill. It kind of speaks for itself.
You know what? There's a couple of things with that. So, Drew, you and I were talking it last year, I think. What is the actual latitude? Because it's not quite as far north as you almost assume, right? But it's far enough to have the conditions that are needed for those things to go on. What's the actual latitude? It's not what we would assume, right?
No, Churchill feels a lot farther north than it actually is, but we're only at 58 degrees.
Which is what was it in the U.S. that it would be equivalent to?
It's roughly the same as being in like Kodiak or Katmai. So, technically, because I was coming here from Anchorage or even Homer, I was having to come south to see polar bears. And it's just kind of the way weather patterns and the way the continent works. It just is further south. And that also pays benefits for Aurora season. These winter months when once this bay actually, well, it's frozen now, but once the bay freezes and you get a lot of that moisture in the air, we have a lot of clear nights for Aurora. And so if you're looking at the Aurora Oval, you think of the places which is centered on the magnetic pole. So if you're thinking of the places that have the best statistical probability of seeing Aurora, you think of places like Tromsø, Norway, you think of places like Iceland, you think of places like southern Greenland, you think of Churchill, you think of Yellowknife. And then people in Fairbanks will tell you it's Fairbanks, but it's actually north of Fairbanks. So we are like the auroral equivalent of being in Wiseman, Alaska, or Tromsø, or some of those, we are directly under the auroral path. And if you cross-reference that with days that have the most clear skies, Churchill's in the top 1 or 2 places that you can come consistently see the northern lights. And particularly here, like next few years, we are in the top of the solar maximum curve. So these next few years are just going to be off the hook for Aurora. So being able to basically have all this right outside your front door. I'm coming here from Alaska, where I'm used to getting in boats and small planes, and just having the opportunity to just do this all from one location has been amazing, life-changing.
Well, I was going to reference that later, but the fact that you moved from Alaska to Churchill speaks volumes about Churchill, right? I mean, you're willing to change your location and not miss any opportunities. It's not the same opportunities. It's obviously different, but it must be really good up there if you were willing to do that.
I think it's been an upgrade. I'm taking it so far. And I've been coming here for so long that every time, and I used to come back for distinct seasons. I'd come for polar bear season. I'd come for Aurora season. And it always just bummed me out to have to leave. And so now I don't have to leave. I can just stay. And like, I look out my window and watch Arctic foxes run by, or just, going for a drive and finding a polar bear kind of thing. It's really just such an amazing place. It's almost like this place should be a UNESCO World Heritage Site or something. Just like it's mind blowing, the opportunities that are here.
So let's talk about that a little bit, Alex, as far as the Aurora opportunities, because obviously the night is lasting quite a lot longer in the spring or late winter, spring. And those Aurora opportunities, obviously, when you have people come up specifically for Aurora, how long compared to other locations are you able to photograph? And does it turn into a straight nighttime trip?
Yeah, I mean, I've been involved with Aurora tours for the last 8 years, and there's really only been, from memory, 2 or 3 trips where people have gotten skunked on Aurora. And 2 of those trips happened when Churchill got hit with one of the worst blizzards that in the history of Churchill. It was this 72-hour event. We had wind gusts of 120 Ks. We got about as much snow over that 72 hours as we normally get over an entire year. It was insane. We had to declare a state of emergency. But I think Drew nailed it when he said that, when the Hudson Bay freezes over, it loses very little moisture. So we have mostly clear skies. So on average, some of the trips up to view the Northern Lights are generally 3 or 4 nights. And that gives you pretty good odds of seeing the Aurora at least one of those nights. Iceland does a phenomenal job of marketing itself as a Northern Lights viewing destination. And the landscape in Iceland is beautiful, but it's also right in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. So you're dealing with a lot of cloud cover. And I can't tell you how many people that I've spoken to that have gone to Iceland for 1 or 2 weeks and, didn't have a cloudless night once. So I think when you just combine all that, it really sets Churchill apart from some of the other viewing destinations in the world for Northern Lights.
And I think the other thing that you guys offer, having the military history there, is you've got some unique foregrounds that you can utilize.
I'm glad you mentioned that, Ron. Yeah, we actually have this rocket range and this launch tower, which they actually used to fire rockets into the atmosphere to conduct tests on the Northern Lights. The military had discovered that really strong Northern Lights had the ability to disrupt enemy radar, and so they were looking for ways to control it. So one of the places we like to take our guests is to actually photograph this abandoned rocket range now with the Aurora dancing behind it.
What are some of the other ones too? Because I got a chance to do, I think it was an old cemetery. I did an old wrecked plane. I did just regular tundra.
Yeah,
there's
some really cool photo ops in Churchill. And the way that we've actually structured our tours is that we'll go out in our vehicles. and chase the aurora based on where it is in the sky. Sometimes, there's patches of clear skies as well, and we just have to kind of track that down. And based on that, we'll either go to Miss Piggy's plane wreck, or we can go to Churchill's golf balls, which is an abandoned radar station. I mentioned the rocket range. If conditions are good, we'll even hike out to the Ithaca shipwreck, which is just off the coast of Churchill. And then, there's all kinds of other viewing locations. Like we'll use the Wapusk Adventures dog yard, which I don't know if you can see, but on the top shelf there's a teepee set up, which is really cool when it's illuminated, to use that as a foreground subject to photograph with the aurora behind it. And then sometimes just shooting straight up, again, because of our geographic location and where that Aurora Oval is, we can sometimes just point the camera straight up and get these really cool corona shots. Basically where it feels like you're almost getting sucked into another vortex when that aurora is right above you and dancing overhead.
Brings up another question. So when you have people come up specifically for aurora trips, obviously, polar bears, Arctic fox, you're going to want long lenses, but what is the perfect kit for someone that's coming up to shoot aurora?
Now, hold on. And before you answer that, include clothing too.
Yes, that would be part of the kit.
Drew, you want to take that one?
Well, sure. So we'll start with the camera stuff, and really, a lot of cameras today are so fancy, and you're basically rolling with your computer, and a lot of people have switched over to the mirrorless cameras and things like that. So we're seeing a lot of the mirrorless cameras, and basically what it takes is a fast ultra wide lens. So you want something in kind of that 14 to 24 millimeter range, and then 2.8 or faster. And there are so many different options for all the different camera companies. I shoot with a Sony A7S II, so I'm one model behind. And then I've paired that with their 14 millimeter, whatever their new one was, their fast one. And then I've also got a 24 millimeter Rokinon Cine lens that's a T15 that actually, one of the things that I've really, I don't shoot as many stills as I used to, because I really enjoy doing video of the aurora, and I've gotten to the point where it's I've got it pretty dialed with the settings and things like that, so I can help talk people through that. So if you've got the right gear, there's just so many possibilities camera wise. And then I know Alex shoots the Nikon systems and has been rocking the D850, which frankly, in terms of image quality and you pair that with the Nikon glass, I still would say that Nikon D850 is the best Aurora camera on the market. I'm hard pressed to come up with something better.
You know what? I'm with Drew on this one. I'm starting to get more into to video, and I've been doing some time lapse stuff, and I just need to follow through and commit to actually setting and forgetting the camera. But when the aurora is ripping, I always want to take stills as well. So I think I gotta get a second body and just set that up, and then take stills as well.
And then in terms of clothing, which is, in many ways more important than, although it should be pointed out that we've been having great success with our guests who have been showing up with the new iPhones. So if somebody's got the iPhone 12 or the iPhone 13, you can come up with some pretty decent stills and some video as well. It's still not close to the quality that you can get out of the some of those low light Sonys and things like that. But even if you're just wanting to snap something for the Instagram story or things like that, the iPhones have really upped their game in the low light department. And they fit nicely in the jacket of your ultra warm parka that you need to to come view the lights here in Churchill. It's considered the subarctic, but it is an Arctic environment. It can get potentially very cold here, and so people are rocking the big parkas. They're rocking burly snow pants. There is a place here in Churchill that rents appropriate outerwear, things like that. I recommend bringing all of your own underlayers, because renting underwear is It's just awkward. So, but it is a matter of dressing in layers so that you can, peel off or adjust or things like that. So I rock the old school bunny boots, the old Alaskan classic military. It kind of fits with the old military vibe here in Churchill. But then there have been a bunch of new boots come out that are really popular. I know Max Block and Deep Cove Johnny, and all, I saw the Instagram handles. Brooke Little Bear, they're all rocking these Fabuki boots. Have you guys seen those? The ultra light, they're from somewhere else. I don't even know where they're from, but we saw a bunch of them come through during polar bear season, and we're going to see a bunch more come through during Aurora season here. And so I don't know, we'll see how they do, but I think I'm going to start recommending those because they come in flashy colors to match every outfit.
Because that's important.
Well, you just don't want to clash, like color coordination and during the Aurora. And then, one of the trickiest things is always your hands, right? You're not theoretically on an Aurora trip, you're not having to handle your camera all that much because you can just sit it and replicate the shot over and over and over, whether through an intervalometer or hitting the button or the cable release, things like that. But keeping your hands warm. And so I usually go with a little lighter glove than people might expect. But I have a parka that's got fleece lined pockets so that I'm not having to pull off big mittens and things like that just to push a button or make an adjustment, things like, of that nature. So I'll go with lighter gloves, and then I just jam my hands in the pockets while the camera's doing its thing, because these are long exposures, usually between 2 and 30 seconds. And so if you're used to shooting wildlife, where you could easily rip off thousands of photos in a single polar bear encounter, with the Aurora, at the end of the night, you usually come home, unless you're doing a time lapse or something like that, you come home with a lot fewer shots because they are longer. You want to keep them going. And so like Julie and I went out the other night, and I came back and I felt like I'd been shooting for a long time, and I really only had like 30 images because they were long exposures and I was moving around and doing different stuff. So, and then in terms of keeping your face and your head warm, a good hat with a good hood that'll come out of your parka, and then having a buff, which is a Canadian company. They make these neck tubes that are either fleece lined or, they break the wind, they keep the wind from going down your collar and things like that. So with a combination of those things, properly layered, you can be quite comfortable out in these super cold temperatures.
How do the cameras handle the cold? Like if you're sitting there what's the length of time that you guys would be out? Is it 2 hours? Is it 4 hours? Is it dictated by the Aurora? What is it? And then how do you get your cameras to handle that temperature for that long?
Yeah, it's tough. The conditions definitely dictate how long we're out there for, and we definitely like to give guests the option of heading back if they're cold or they've run out of camera or battery life. But we'll chase the Auroras as long as we have to. There's definitely challenges. I know that my camera, the mirror is definitely frozen up on me. I've shot blind sometimes where my control panel isn't visible anymore. I know some of the mirrorless cameras, their battery life doesn't last as long. So sometimes for that, we'll often leave the bodies outside as well, because as soon as you bring it into a warm environment, it fogs up. So sometimes just leaving the body outside and just taking the battery out and then, putting it in your pocket, and sometimes even having those little hand warmers or toe warmers to just give it a little bit of extra heat will kind of preserve and extend your battery life. But yeah, shooting in the cold is challenging.
So that's the biggest concern, is the batteries, number one. But then you can have the LCD screen or whatever kind of screen you got go down, or you could have, what about like frosting and stuff on the lens? Is that a big concern? And I have heard where people will make like a little glove for their camera and use the hand warmers or toe warmers inside to keep it heated up a little bit. But that to me is, it's like, could I do that? Or is that going to cause more condensation? Or who knows? Is that some of the things you can do? Can you can you warm up your camera and make it last longer?
I would take out the battery and just focus on the battery, not the body. You don't want to. Yeah, I mean, as soon as your lens fogs up, that's pretty much it for the night.
And what's the temperature we're talking? You guys, we're talking cold, right? But are we talking? So let's talk in. If you talk in Celsius, I'll convert it on the what's show notes page. But if you talk in Fahrenheit, that'd be a little bit better for the U.S. audience. Anyway,
let's start off at -40 because that's where it evens out, right?
Right.
So, I mean, in Churchill, it really all comes down to the wind. When there's no wind and it's calm, it can be quite pleasant. But we're kind of right on the shore, and we get that really cold north wind that comes off the bay. And so we kind of take that into consideration as well when we're picking locations to view and photograph the aurora. So if there's a lot of wind, we'll actually try to seek some protection in the boreal forest, and then, play with the trees as a foreground subject to photograph the aurora. But during Northern Lights season, the temperature can range anywhere between -10 and -50 degrees Celsius.
So we're talking just above zero and all the way down to -40, 50.
Yeah. But like I said, it's that wind that kills you.
Right. I had that scenario just the other night, actually. Julie and I were out driving around. We were along the coast, and it was windy. And so we ended up going down into the boreal forest and just walking a couple minutes out into this trail, and it was perfectly calm and still, and the forest really blocked that wind. And so if one option isn't working for you, you've got another. And we only have 40 kilometers of roads that we can utilize here, but the amount of variety that you can, in terms of foregrounds, in terms of protection and things like that, that you can encounter in that limited amount of roads is quite amazing. And then Alex and I were out running around on the Churchill River getting ice formations the other night. It really is just kind of amazing, again, at the diversity of stuff you have just right here. And so we were talking about batteries before that, and I know I've come up with so I switched to mirrorless, right? I'm talking about that Sony A7S II, which is kind of notorious for poor battery life. They've upgraded it in the 3. Alex has the mirrored camera, so his batteries last a lot longer, but I've gone to a 3 battery rotation, basically. So my camera will be on my tripod, and then when one battery gets down to the point where it's not working, I'll just pop that battery out and put it in an inside pocket, put a new battery in, and then I'll shoot till that goes down, and then I'll put a new battery in, and by the time that third battery runs out, the first battery has warmed to the point that I'm back in business. And so just having, and it takes some important pocket management. Same thing with memory cards. I've seen Michael out in the field and always the memory cards and where they're going, and you got to keep track of it. But once you get a system in place, and we help people with all that, it's actually pretty slick. That's another reason where I just wear those light gloves, because I can pop open the battery cover on and throw a new one in without missing a beat.
Just a quick word from our sponsors. The first sponsor that I'm going to include is Cold Case Gear. It's a Colorado company, and they make basically insulated cell phone cases. However, these cases are advantageous to our audience because they can also be used for camera batteries during the cold weather and extend the life of your smaller batteries. They'll fit the larger batteries for the pro model cameras, but you can fit multiple smaller batteries in these cold cases and then put them inside. They are insulated, and you can check them out at coldcasegear.com. And it is a great product to extend the life of your camera batteries during the winter months.
It's really important to have them, I think. I can think of a lot of applications. This year we were photographing moose in Alaska in September, and it snowed. And so it got very cold, and it doesn't take up a lot of space. So if you just carry it around in your bag and just have it, then you have the opportunity to, if your camera's sitting out there and it's just getting cold and you're waiting for an animal to do something, or you're waiting, that battery is just going down and down and down. And as long as you got some sort of rotation going on, much like Drew was talking about in the podcast, that is just going to extend your shooting time for sure. I don't think you're going to hurt your batteries too much when you do that sort of thing, but the time you have to shoot that day really can be increased if you manage them properly. I mean, it's not much bigger than a cell phone, right? Because
It's
is
not much
intended
bigger
for cell
than a
phones.
cell phone at all, but it does fit several batteries in it when you use it in the field.
So another sponsor, which we talk about all the time, and we've got a new deal with these guys. We have Precision Camera, and I just talked to Mike this morning, and we were like, hey, it's a new quarter. Let's come up with a new promotion. And in the process of that, we were just talking about how business was going. And he was telling me that used camera business is really good right now. And I said, well, maybe there's some sort of promotion we can do with that. And he's like, yeah, as a matter of fact, we're always looking for good used camera equipment. And they do a lot of little events around their Texas area. But I said, Wild and Exposed has a nationwide audience. And maybe there's people out there that want to sell some gear. It's super easy to do on their website. You can just go to, I looked at it this morning. Used gear, you click on that, and then from there you can get an estimate. So you can list what you have for sale. So whatever camera body, whatever lenses, whatever. And you have to tell them what kind of condition it is in. And once you do that, it'll tell you what you can expect to get when you submit it to the website. Then what you do is you send your equipment down there, and they verify that the way you rated it, the quality, the shape it was in was equal to what you said it was on the website. Once all that's done, then they just send you a check in the mail, which is pretty cool. And this promotion for this particular quarter is going to be any Wild and Exposed listener that sends their stuff in and wants to get some cash is going to get 10% more than what they would normally pay. So that's kind of cool. I mean, you turn in a camera, we all use these pretty high-end bodies, right? So let's say you turned in a 1DX and these are just round. I have no idea what they pay for it, but let's say they pay $1,000. That's $100. That's not too bad, not too shabby. So the way you get that is you go into the website, and if you look when you're rating all your equipment, there was one other little section near the bottom that says "Tell me more," and when you go to that section, you just type in "Wild and Exposed." So that's the way you're going to capitalize on this this particular promotion. Yeah, and it's not tell me more. It says more information. So if you just type in there Wild and Exposed, you're going to get an extra 10%, which is pretty awesome.
And if you're in the market for new gear, it's a good opportunity to trade it and not have to go through the hassle of selling individual components as well and get a little bit more for it.
Most of the time you're going to get a little bit more if you sell it on your own. But I never do. I always trade my gear in and then just go for and do it exactly what you said. I just apply it towards the next whatever new thing it's out there. Lastly, we have so in this particular podcast that you are listening to, we talked about the opportunity to jump on some of the workshops that we are either promoting for somebody else or some of our own. And we have 2 bear trips planned for this coming year. There's one spring trip and then there's one fall trip. And it's all Alaska coastal brown bears. That's going to be going to different places just because of the time of year. But we have one spot that opened up in our first trip because that filled up really fast. But we had a couple that has a family emergency come up and only one of them is going to be able to go. So we had a second spot or one spot open up on that trip. And then the fall trip, we haven't advertised that much, but there's actually 4 spots available there. So if you're interested, hit up the show notes for this particular podcast and I'll have a link to the workshops. And once you go to that link, you can click on either one, read about it. And then if you're interested, there's a place to call Dave at AK Adventures and get yourself signed up. He'll tell you all the particulars and what you got to do. And then you can read about what we're going to do and some of the things you might see and then also see and photograph. And then also you'll know what to bring and that sort of thing.
Yeah, and we'll all be staying on a boat. We'll have an opportunity to talk about your gear, help set your gear up, talk about adventures in the field, each day after the return. Mike is going to be on the boat, and if you are looking to do some video, there's nobody better to pick his brain and learn a little bit more, kind of deepen your wealth of knowledge while you're on that trip. The first trip is more spring bears, so you're looking at sows and cubs a little bit more than you would be on the second trip, and the second trip would be fishing bears. So it's a great opportunity to get some quality images, spend some good time in the field, but also, just experience Alaska in a way that most people don't have the opportunity to get away from society for a few days, and that never disappoints.
Yeah, and this boat is pretty awesome. It's got everything you could want, plenty of space to set up your stuff, and the food is really good. The people that run the boat, the captain and his crew, are super awesome people. And it's just amazing to be able to be out there. And the cool thing too is if you go to a place and it's not very good, no problem. You just pull up the anchor and head on to the next spot. So it's kind of cool to have that flexibility. And Dave, who runs those tours all year long, he is totally dialed in with that whole area. So if for some reason on the fish running stuff or the bears fishing stuff, if there aren't fish at this particular river, chances are there might be just down the way a bit, and he'll know exactly where to go. So I expect it to be really, really busy. The spring trip, man, there's just so many different things. It's pretty unusual to go out that early because it is fairly early in the schedule. But Drew had, everybody knows Drew from the podcast and this particular podcast, but Drew guided this same time last year. He had the most fun on this trip than any other trip that he's done in the spring, just because of the, conditions are going to change and years are going to change, but they saw wolves, they saw bears, they had sows with cubs, they had big males, they had all kinds of activity. So should be a good one.
Absolutely. Let's get back to the podcast.
So you were talking about ice formations on the river. Can you do northern lights with that? That would be kind of cool, wouldn't it? Yeah, I think of that. Who's that guy we followed in Alaska, Drew? Tasker, where he would.
Oh yeah, he's got some fantastic stuff.
Yeah, I could see all kinds of cool stuff where you light up the ice formations and also have Aurora going on or something like that. I mean, sure. So sky's the limit, right? With you guys, if somebody rolls into town and says, "Hey, can we try this, and this?" Chances are you guys can provide it.
That's right. There's we have on average about 14-foot tides in Churchill. So even though it looks like the bay and the river is frozen solid, there's still quite a bit of movement there. And when you get those pressure ridges jamming up against each other, it creates some really cool ice formations, and it's different every time. So yeah, the sky is really the limit when it comes to photo ops.
Tell me, or tell us, or tell the audience, how does someone get to Churchill? So they take one of your tours, one of your Aurora tours coming up. What is it works for Canada too. I mean, I'm sure there's plenty of people that have never been to Churchill. So where do you fly to? How do you get there? Can you do the train in the winter? I know when I went, I didn't do the train. I flew directly to Churchill. It was kind of expensive, but for my time and my schedule, that was the way I did it. But
yeah,
just kind of line all that stuff out so someone knows.
Well, you're actually pretty limited when it comes to options of getting to Churchill because there's no roads that lead up here, so you're limited to just flying up or taking the train. Now, flying up is, it costs quite a bit. There's only one airline that flies up here. That's Calm Air, and we actually, because we're able to book a certain amount of flights each year, they've actually extended a corporate rate to us. So we can help you out with a bit of a discount on airfare. And then if time isn't an issue, you can take the train up, and that's with Via Rail. That's kind of the national rail service here in Canada. And there's 3 trains a week that depart Winnipeg on Sundays, Tuesdays, and Thursdays. So it takes pretty much 48 hours to get here by train from Winnipeg.
And then your average Aurora trip is how many days?
Well, we've put together a photography package. So that's 7 days start to finish. It starts in Winnipeg and ends in Winnipeg. It includes 4 nights of Aurora shooting. Then we have a weekend getaway package that was kind of geared more towards the domestic market. So people that don't necessarily need accommodation in Winnipeg, people that want to travel a little bit closer to home. And then to cater to the independent traveler, people can come up to Churchill on their own and then sign up for our Aurora call list. So every night we have a list of people that want to be woken up if the Aurora is out. And if we if the Aurora is visible, we'll just go down that list and start calling people up and telling them to gear up, and we'll pick them up and we'll head out of town to view and photograph the Aurora.
So we've covered the summer, the fall polar bear season before the ice, and we've covered the Aurora. You guys offer some springtime opportunities as well, correct?
Well, we're hoping to. We haven't officially offered a birding tour yet, but Churchill is an amazing birders destination as well. I had the opportunity of working with a local birder last year named Rhonda Reed, and I think she counted over 250 different kinds of bird species in Churchill. We have a very unique ecosystem here in that we're kind of right on the edge of the tundra, the boreal forest, and then we're right along the Hudson Bay shoreline as well. So we attract tons of shorebirds. So Drew hasn't ever been in Churchill in the springtime yet, and I'm looking forward to kind of sharing that with him. But we're going to get into some bird photography and try to put together a birding tour for people and start flooding the internet with bird images from Churchill.
It's got to be awesome. I mean, I've seen so many cool images from up there that there's not a lot, and that's what's cool about it is you could come up and get something that's totally different, right?
I think the thing in the springtime that I really love is that, days are obviously noticeably getting longer. But after you've spent a winter in Churchill where it's kind of eerily quiet, just hearing the migratory birds coming back, and then all of a sudden, hearing that water start to drip again when the ice melts, it's really energizing to then just be surrounded by all that life again,
Well, and coming from Alaska to here and seeing the opportunities that are outside the traditional polar bear season or tourist season here in Churchill, it really is impressive. And I feel like the next few years, Churchill is going to be the kind of the off seasons, if you will, of Churchill are going to be the diamond in the rough as people realize, you can come get all of these things all in one trip, whether it's the belugas, the Aurora, polar bears, flowers, close up macro stuff. It's all just right here. And one of the things we always, so it's polar bear season. We always get asked, can you see the northern lights and the polar bears at the same time? And then, which, that is the cloudy time of year. So if it happens, it happens. And then in the Aurora season, we always get asked, well, can we see polar bears? Which, during Aurora season is not necessarily the best time to run into a polar bear, given that most of your activities are happening at night and you're looking up. So it's not ideal polar bear viewing scenario, but then we did have something come up this year that we're able to offer a combination trip where we're going to have some nights of Aurora viewing on either end before we go down to a lodge in Wapusk National Park to watch the polar bear cubs come out of their dens. So it's a den emergence combination trip with some Aurora as well that we're really, really stoked on for this year. And I think this will air. Yeah, I think this will air before they run. So if anybody's listening to this, you might be able to shoot us a message. We'll see if we've got a spot for you.
Yeah, and how many of those are you going to do, or is there a couple of tours like that, or is it just one? And how many participants?
We have 2 departures right now. We have one in February and one in March. The denning season is really only about 4.5 to 5 weeks long, so it's a really short season. And the 2 departures that we have are kind of right in the middle of that season. For us, we want to run the trips again nice and small, so like 6 or 7 people per group. And yeah, we still have a couple spots left. This kind of all came together really quick. I've been to Wapusk National Park twice now, and I've always wanted to bring guests to there, but it's such a remote destination, and it's in such high demand that it's tough to secure spots. And I know this isn't a sentence that often gets said, but I think because of COVID, we actually got lucky that some spots opened up and we were able to jump on them. So we reached out to a number of people right away that we knew had interest in doing this trip. And, you know, it's kind of tough to put together last minute, but yeah, we're excited to offer it this year, and then hopefully we can offer it on an annual basis moving forward.
We'll put that link to those that opportunity in the show notes. So if you want to find it, it'll go right to your all's website so that you can see about that tour. And with 2 of them, that's pretty awesome.
Yeah. Well, it's a fun kind of adventure-filled trip. I mean, you fly into Winnipeg, and then you fly up to Churchill, and we'll pick you up, and we'll go looking for Aurora that night. And then we actually to get down to the lodge, we'll get on the train and get dropped off in the middle of nowhere. And we're met by then vans on the mat tracks like they used to use in Yellowstone or things like that. And they take us into the lodge where we'll spend several days out looking for the polar bear cubs. And then we come back to Churchill just in reverse and do some more Aurora hunting. So the whole adventure, it's planes, trains, and automobiles required to get you out to the middle of nowhere. And the whole time, it's primetime Aurora, polar bear cubs. Like really, it's the ultimate Manitoba winter adventure. Like you really couldn't. It's such an interesting combination to get on in basically just a 2-week trip.
This is the ultimate. I mean, you think about this spot for when you watch Planet Earth or you watch any BBC National Geographic production where you see cubs. There's a pretty good chance that this came from this area. There's a few spots in Russia. I mean, there's a few spots elsewhere too where you can get this stuff, but I know it's a very popular spot. So if you're looking for those kind of images, you better jump on right now and get that tour signed up. So that's pretty cool. I was going to ask you, you said it earlier, Alex. So these trips leave from Winnipeg. So people have to get to Winnipeg. And then from there, you guys got them covered, right? Or is it walk through that for me just to make sure we've got it for the audience?
Yeah, I mean, we've been able to partner up with the Courtyard Marriott, which is a hotel a 2-minute walk away from the airport here in Winnipeg. And again, because of the volume of tours and guests that we're running now on an annual basis, we were able to secure a corporate rate with them, which we just pass on to our guests as well. I know, sometimes we can kind of make that optional. There's been people that would rather use points on hotels if they travel a lot. And so we can kind of customize that part of the trip. But yeah, I mean, we basically want to take care of you start to finish.
So if somebody wants to do a trip, is it best for them to call you? To be honest, I haven't been through all the particulars on your website. Obviously, I've looked at all the tours and stuff, but if somebody wants to sign up, is it best just to email you or call you and just work directly with you to figure out all the itinerary and all the little things that you got to figure out to make it happen?
Yeah, definitely take a look at the website. There's a lot of good info on there. Drew and I usually end up calling guests anyways, just because it's a little bit more fluid to have a conversation with someone and kind of answer questions as they come up. But the website definitely has a lot of good info on there. I would start there and then send us an email, send us an inquiry, let us know which dates you're interested in, and then yeah, we can follow that up with a phone call just to kind of help you prepare for the trip.
Because we were talking about the logistics on, say this bear cubs and borealis trip we were talking about. I mean, it's a lot of logistics, and so really, let us handle the logistics. We've really endeavored to make it a no muss, no fuss, one price, and then we'll handle all those little details because it can be tricky to navigate from afar.
And yeah, and I mean that's a really good point. It does get really tricky to manage, the comings and goings of each individual guest, whereas keeping everyone together, there's less opportunity for things to go wrong.
I always have paralysis when I start looking into this stuff because it's like I can't figure it out. And that's why I always go with someone like you guys just to figure it out so that I can focus on the photography or that sort of thing, the video, whatever I'm doing. That's my important part. So that's awesome that you guys offer that.
The number of opportunities, the sheer volume of opportunity that you guys offer, I think is advantageous in and of itself. But then when you add the ability to kind of customize a trip and tailor it to a photography so you're not tied to a larger group, I think that's the advantage, or the big advantage.
So I want to get a polar bear in fireweed.
Take a number.
How do we do that?
Yeah, those are coveted images.
Is it? How hard is it? I mean, on a scale of 1 to 10, where does it fall?
I don't have any images of bears rolling around in the fireweed. I know there's a couple areas that you can explore up the coast. And again, that's one of the things that we're hoping to do this summer is actually charter a Zodiac and go to some different locations. It's challenging, but doable.
So the way that's going to happen is it's going to be a beluga trip or a summer trip. You're going to be doing something else, and then the opportunity is going to be like, oh, there's a polar bear walking down through this vast field of fireweed. Let's get that.
Yeah. The fireweed really only blooms from it kind of starts that last week of July and then goes into mid-August. So there's kind of that small window there.
What I was going to say for shots like that, there's bear karma does play a significant role in the ability to get those shots and to get them regularly. And so, so you just gotta, it's good, clean living while you're at home, and then you can transfer that, just roll it on over to your trip to Churchill. And it's the Santa Claus principle.
What he's saying, right, Michael, is you're not going to get that shot.
Or I'm going to have to spend 5 years trying to get it.
It is interesting. We were talking about all the distinct seasons and the difference between polar bear season. And polar bear season is like the hook that gets people interested in Churchill. And that's how most people know of Churchill. And then people say, well, what's it like in the summer? What's it like? And so we're starting to get more and more people who are trying to get the year-round experience. So once they've been here, they've done the polar bear season. Well, let's check out the belugas. And so we've got a lot of repeat folks that have just been coming back season after season to try and experience the full spectrum of what's available.
Yeah, and I think we have Dave and Jenny committed to experiencing Churchill in the summertime. So it's exciting to get them back up here and experience a different season. And I you know what, I want to give Jenny and Brooke actually a shout out for specifically booking another tour earlier in our season. They came up with us. The first time they came a little bit later in the season when there was already snow and ice formed, and they were happy with those shots that they got, but they wanted to come back and photograph something different. And I know that a lot of the shots that they got this past year, a little bit earlier in the season when there wasn't snow on the ground yet, they were still really powerful and kind of helped tell a story of climate change and how it was actually a bit of a later freeze up. So yeah, I mean, think about that when it comes to diversifying your portfolio for photography as well. As photographing bears on snow is cool, but there's definitely other opportunities to photograph bears.
We talk all the time on the podcast where, especially with photography, if you're going to set yourself apart, you have to have something different, right? Sounds like you guys are offering an opportunity to get something different that not everybody else is going to have. You do have the getting to Churchill, since you can only get there a certain way. You can't drive there. Not everybody can go on a whim. It's planning, and there's some things going on. So if you're one of those people that's looking to change up your portfolio or add something completely different, that sounds like what you guys are offering is that, and it's those opportunities to get polar bears and fireweed.
Well, and fall colors, tundra, it's particularly if you're looking to tell a conservation story. Like here, we're dealing with the icons of the Arctic. They're and they're, various threatened status or endangered status, depending on which country you're in. But if you're trying to tell a conservation story, you do need those different backdrops. You do need those different aspects of a polar bear's life to really paint an accurate picture of what these bears are going through in terms of time on land and going through the lean times. So yeah, the opportunity for that is here. So if you're looking to tell a story about polar bears, give us a shout.
Well, and Chaz, we've interviewed him a couple of times on the podcast, and he has a super powerful image of moose from up there. And I believe he was up there shooting polar bears, but there's the opportunity to get just such a variety from shorebirds and migrating birds to moose to Arctic fox to red fox, beluga. I mean, it's just endless. So if you want to diversify that portfolio, I think it's worth a call.
Yeah, I was just thinking about the birds, actually. One of my favorite birds, we had a peregrine falcon take up snow bunting right in front of our vehicle this year. And then we had a bunch of sightings of white-phased gyrfalcons, which is kind of a unique bird that we have here in Churchill. And they're one that sticks around all winter, too, so we're always keeping an eye out for them.
Do they really?
Yeah. There was actually a viral video.
That winter.
There was actually a viral video a few years ago where a white-faced gyrfalcon landed on the Aurora webcam that we've got out at the Northern Studies Center, and so it's looking at itself in the reflection and things like that. It had frost on its. Well, birds probably don't have eyelashes, so I'm assuming it's some sort of feather they have on their face. But it was they're still around. What else? We've got a lot of ptarmigan.
What about owls?
Snowies.
I'm sure you've got the snowies and probably. What about great grays or northern hawk owls or great horned owls?
The only time that I've seen a great gray was a few years back, and Drew and I were actually going for a cruise looking for wildlife, and we happened to spot this great gray, and then he actually just spotted one. What was it, last week or a couple weeks ago? Walking his dogs.
What most people are picturing the snowies, you'll see them out on the tundra. This time of year, you are seeing a lot of snowies probably in your Instagram feed because they've all gone south. So we don't have them this time of year, but we'll catch them out on the tundra periodically, looking for lemmings and voles and things like that.
So now we could get a polar bear and a snowy in Fire Week.
Yeah. It's just added to the list. We'll see what we can do.
You get that on your second or third trip. You gotta be a repeat.
Build up that parent,
that's one of those shots that everybody's going to have their long lenses, and then the person with the iPhone is going to get it.
Well, what else? Anything you guys want to add to the actual services that you offer, or something we didn't cover? I think we've covered just about everything, and I think what you want to do is go to your website. You can go to our show notes page, and I'll have a link right to your website, or you guys can go directly to their website and see all of the tours that you offer. But is there anything that we've missed that we should definitely talk about just in this format?
I feel like we've covered tons. And I noticed that you guys already had our 2 Aurora packages listed. So thank you for that. That's awesome. Yeah,
I'm going to add to that too. So what he's referring to is if you go to the Wild and Exposed website and go to wildandexposed.com/workshops, there's a list of different tours that we are highlighting. Some of our own. We've got a couple of bear trips, and we're going to add to it. Ron's going to do some stuff and Jason's doing some stuff. But I thought working with Alex and Drew, it was a good opportunity to highlight a lot of their trips because they're more catered to our audience than some of the other trips where you might get paired up with someone that's just there for not photography, which oftentimes limits your opportunities as a photographer because a tour operation has to cater to everybody. So they're constantly trying to skirt around everybody's needs. But with your tours, it's more of the photography slant. So you're going to get way more opportunity to get what you really want to get if you go with you guys.
It's the Churchill experience. We're really trying to share with people what has drawn us here and what hopefully will keep people coming back for years to come.
Yeah, no, I think it's awesome. All right, Ron, anything else from you?
Nothing for me. I was kind of sitting back most of the time and just absorbing. and writing down on my annual schedule when I need to be up there.
There is not enough time in the day or in the year or in a life to do it all. So this should rank right up there for most people.
The beluga trip piques my interest almost as much as polar bears, to be honest.
Well, that's a major draw for me too, because one of my former jobs in Alaska, I worked as a marine mammal observer, and one of the things we were always on the lookout for was beluga whales. And when you'd spot them in Alaska, it's with binoculars or something, looking, oh, that little white spot way out there is, oh yeah, that's a beluga. And then you come here and you start, going through Alex's Instagram and seeing the full face beluga whale shots as they're looking up at you, and I'm just really excited about that opportunity.
We've had to put prop guards on all of our vessels because they're attracted to the bubbles that the prop creates. So often you can just be trolling around and you'll get a pod of beluga whales following you. So yeah, to protect the belugas from the props, we now have prop guards on all of our vessels. But yeah, they're quite literally bumping into the boat.
When you say a pod, what's the average size? What does it range from? Could it be from 2 to 200, or could it be from 2 to 15?
So belugas generally travel together in pods of 10 to 15. And there's no real, you can have families that travel together, or you can just have, beluga buddies that communicate with each other and jive well together. And they can join one pod one day and then join a different pod another day. But generally you're looking at 10 to 15 in a pod of whales that are kind of traveling together.
You've been listening to the Wild and Exposed podcast. If you haven't yet, please give us a rating and a review. And make sure you're subscribed so that you'll get every episode we produce as soon as we drop it. And as always, thanks for tuning in.
We're gonna make it someday. Nothing's gonna get in our way. We will be the biggest band in town.